Okay, all right. Welcome, everybody. This is our monthly Food Allergy Institute live Q&A and webinar. Really enjoy doing these. Today is going to be, I think, is a really great one. My name is Dr. Inderpal Randhawa. I'm the founder and CEO of the Food Allergy Institute. I'd like to wish everybody a really happy Veterans Day. It's a very special day for our organization as well, because we do support our military families directly, those who have kids with food allergies, and really appreciate all they and all veterans do for this country. We're going to focus on a different topic today. We try to really rotate these topics to give you kind of the whole experience of what TIP does and what TIP can do for children and young adults who have food anaphylaxis. And today we're going to talk about kind of the other conditions, really the whole body benefits of what the Tolerance Induction Program is able to achieve. I think you'll find this very interesting. So if you have any type of eczema, asthma, allergic rhinitis, other skin conditions, EOE, et cetera, you'll kind of get a sense of how this all kind of fits together and how we're able to take very complicated cases and really, get every patient to the finish line and get them to a point of remission where life is just a whole lot different. So thank you for joining us today. I will introduce our special guest here in a second. But I would like to kick it off here with a quick video.
For our patients, the Tolerance Induction Program is more than just a treatment. It's sleepovers, birthday parties, dining out at restaurants. It's the possibility of a future filled with monumental moments.
You have unlocked egg freedom. That means you can eat as much egg as you want. You could eat things that have egg in them. You have basically no more restrictions on eating eggs.
I've come so far.
You've come so far.
You have. At Food Allergy Institute, we provide a revolutionary approach to treating food allergies, enabling patients who complete the Tolerance Induction Program to embrace food freedom, the ability to eat whatever they want, whenever they want, without the fear of an allergic reaction. Discover how Food Allergy Institute can transform your child's life. Visit our website, www.foodallergyinstitute.com. Food Allergy Institute. Monumental moments made here.
And those are the true monumental moments. I've been doing this work now for 2 decades. That's a long time. It's been a huge part of my career. My background as the founder of this organization is a 5-time board certified transplant immunologist. I spend to this day even a good portion of my time in intensive care units. And I think it's important to understand why was it important to actually take on this condition? Why was it important to try and solve this problem 2 decades ago? And the answer really is pretty straightforward. There is no other condition like anaphylaxis. If you think about it, you can go from a very normal day in a matter of seconds and minutes, you can have your entire life turned around. You can be in the ER, you can be in ICU, and even things worse than that can happen. When I saw those stories come into my ICU 2 decades ago, it simply bothered me. It was to a point where I said, there must be a better way to do this. It doesn't make sense that we have to accept this as status quo. And despite really very little interest from the standard systems that are out there, very little interest from the FDA and the NIH, I went forward and said, no, we're going to try and find a way to redefine how to treat this condition. It took an incredible amount of effort from not only myself, but a large number of teams over all these years. It took a lot of courage from the first patients who entered this program 2 decades ago. Many of those folks are in their 30s now, which is quite remarkable. But ultimately, this resulted in a true shift in the standard of care of food allergy. This shift means that you can actually define anaphylaxis across diagnosis, meaning you should be able to get a set of tests and really have high confidence that you know what you're anaphylactic to and what you're not anaphylactic to. And then you should be able to find a therapeutic model that results in remission, in a point of a curative solution where patients can actually consume any amount of those foods without restriction, essentially living the life of a non-allergic person. And the third really important component of this is the long-term benefits, the long-term remission, the long-term sustained remission that we see now in our patients now for 2 decades. This has been the work of, again, many, but this is the work, again, of individuals as well. And it's parents like our guest today who really, I think, are just exemplary in their willingness to say, we're not going to accept this life for our child. We're going to try and find a solution, and we're going to put in whatever amount of effort is necessary to achieve that goal, because this is a brief period of time in their life to put in that work, ultimately achieving lifelong, a lifelong remission, which just makes things so much better. So I'd like to introduce our guest today, Melissa DiCarno, who lives out on the East Coast, and I'll hand off to you, Melissa. Thanks for joining us today.
Great job with my last name. Nobody gets it. I'm thrilled to be here just to share a little bit more about our story. My name is Melissa. I live in Arlington, Virginia, at probably about, it feels like 5 or 10 minutes from Washington, D.C. We're always in D.C. My son Xander is a patient in TIP. He's 6 years old. He is the middle child, so I have an older daughter and a younger daughter. We started TIP in June of 2024. And when we came in, the allergies that we knew of were sesame, wheat, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, and he had also gotten hives to avocado. When we did the initial blood work, the blood work showed that he was possibly most likely anaphylactic to about 26 foods total, even though we were really controlling for the 5 of the top 9 that we knew about. In addition to the food allergies, or prior to the food allergies, Xander had extreme eczema that I'll get into in a little bit. And he also had environmental allergies. And then when we started the program, we also realized that he was asthmatic. That usually shows up more so when he has a cold, and particularly if he's having an allergic reaction to wheat. That's when we really start to see the trouble with his lungs. I work full time. My husband works full time. Our kids are in extracurriculars, much like any other parent with food allergies. I have them all in ballet, Xander particularly, partly because it's inside and it can help us stave off a little bit of the challenges with some of the environmental allergies. His sister is a very, very talented ballerina, so I put everybody in the same extracurricular. He tried soccer for a bit. That turned out to be a little bit too much of a challenge, where it was just causing him to react too much. And so we're going to take a break from that. And hopefully when he's a little bit further into the program, we'll give it a little, we'll probably try that one again. And then the last bit is, Xander is 6, but we have over a decade of food allergy expertise. My older daughter, Miri, was born with a food allergy. She was allergic to dairy, not nearly as severe as Xander, but it helped us learn a lot before we really kind of were thrusted off the deep end when Xander came along. Miri eventually outgrew her dairy allergy on her own when she was 7. So, Xander's been the star of the show for the last few years. But yeah, I'll pass it back off to you, Dr. Randhawa, and I'll see you guys in a bit when I tell you a little bit more about my story.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. So just an overview for all of you who joined us today. It's important you obviously was taking the time to go online, to hopefully talk to some other folks as well about the program, but it's really important to understand what TIP is. What is this Tolerance Induction Program? Again, 2 decades in the making. We've had over 25,000 patients through our system. We are by far the largest food anaphylaxis organization in the world. That is saying a lot, especially if you think about this is all we do, right? This is our entire focus, 24/7, 365. And we're able to accomplish this work through data, right? So this is a lot of data modeling, machine learning, AI, and we'll get into some of those details. But what it is more important to understand is it takes that level of technology to solve a very complex problem. And so when you have a complicated problem like food allergies, like food anaphylaxis, as you heard even in Melissa's case, You want to know the details. You want to know exactly what the total risk looks like. What are all those different foods that can actually trigger a serious reaction? And ultimately, it's also important to know what is not going to trigger a reaction. Then the next phase of TIP is really focused on how to actually turn the immune system down and ultimately turn the immune system off. That's the right word, off. Over time, our patients are able to lower their IgE levels down to 0. It often will take 3 to 5 years into remission, but that finding is also quite remarkable because you don't even see that in general allergy or in the kids who quote outgrow allergies. You don't see those types of numbers. So this is a very driven process. It's a very organized process. And in all of that organization ultimately is safety. That's a really, really big part of what we do and what we've done very well now for the better part of 2 decades. Our ultimate goal here is it's not just this term of remission or curative solution. It's really a non-allergic life. That's important, as you kind of saw in the intro video, right? And this is a boy there who is highly anaphylactic to eggs, numbers that are off the charts. And in the end, he's able to consume a large plate of eggs without a problem. And that is the non-allergic life. That is the non-avoidance life. And that's ultimately what TIP offers, is this life without restrictions. And what it does for young people, whether they're a child or a young adult, is it really does kind of unshackle, their entire life, which is, I think, just phenomenal. And the lifetime benefits of that, I think, are just, they speak for themselves. What we do that's so different than anyone else is that we are going to be very careful on every single case, meaning that we're using the data of one person and we're building that data of one person against the data of 25,000 plus individuals who've come before them. You can understand in the world of big data, as that's kind of now a popular thing, at least outside of medicine, that has tremendous power, right? Once you can actually understand how that data is utilized in an organized way, we can identify not only what your child or your young adult is allergic to, but ultimately how we can actually direct the immune system using biosimilar proteins to turn down that immune response. That's a very important part of what we do. In fact, we're the only organization to do this type of work. This is something that has been completely developed under my supervision, as again, my world of transplant has significantly helped to identify these molecules, these chemical compounds that are found in food proteins that we can dial in down to micrograms and milligrams and actually give those to patients over a few months of time. And what that means is if you're anaphylactic to dairy, before we ever actually give you any cow's milk, we've worked through multiple cycles of biosimilar proteins, turn down that immune response, and we go from 0 cow's milk to full cow's milk, meaning they are generally consuming about 4 ounces of cow's milk in a matter of like 2 months. And that's often, concerning for parents to hear something like that. But again, this is all organized, forecasted, and ultimately done in a safe and highly effective way. So this model is something unique to us. It ultimately is what gives us the concept of remission, and that is something that nobody else offers. If you hear this concept of remission or a non-avoidance lifestyle, I would argue that it has not been proven. You're going to hear some, folks say, well, it's possible here, it's possible there. That's fine. We've done this work for 20 years, achieving the same goal of remission for every single person who enters the program. That is our goal, that is our endpoint, and we don't stop until we achieve that goal. And all of you have seen different doctors. I'm sure some of you have seen allergists as well. And really what we're talking about here, what separates us from the typical allergist, you have to kind of start from the top. And that is, here at this organization, you are not really dealing with an allergist office. We are not a small clinic. Melissa can certainly attest to this. We're a big system. We've got 125,000 square feet of space, hundreds of employees, and built into our system is everything from 24/7 on-call command center support to our own software engineers, our own AI engineers, our own food laboratory and our food scientists, as well as our research laboratory, diagnostics labs, and so forth. So it's a very large system, and that large system supports tens of thousands of patients, not only here in California, but around the country and around the world. So that's a clear difference right there from what you see in a typical allergist office. Our ultimate difference, honestly, is that this is all we do, right? All we do here is manage food anaphylaxis to a point of going from anaphylaxis to a point of remission. That's food freedom for us. That is a lifetime benefit. There's a lifetime of not avoiding things, and that just has, again, amazing results down the road for patients. We also are highly patient specific, meaning, we're not going to just do what OIT does, right? OIT, I mean, if you look into oral immunotherapy, that is a one size fits all approach. It's the same ladder, it's the same approach for every single patient. So one person goes in with a peanut allergy, and the next one goes in, they do the same exact thing. You have to go in there, for 4 to 6 hours, at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. And you're going up and down this ladder of dosing, hoping you can ultimately get to like 1 peanut or 2 peanuts. That is a burden that you're putting on the system. And because it's not tailored to one person's immune system, it causes a lot of background noise. It causes a lot of inflammation. And that is ultimately where you see the side effects of OIT, and ultimately their much lower levels of success rates compared to what you see here in TIP. Our approach here is patient specific. It is technology focused. It's data driven. So there's no trial and error here. We're not trying to guess and see what works. We have tremendous confidence in the work we've done. We've certainly done that now for 2 decades. We've done it under tight regulation. We are regulated more than any type of typical practice. And we are certainly regulated, in fact, more so than a drug company. And that is something we elect to do. Ultimately, what this does is it allows us to maintain high levels of success, high levels of confidence in what we do, and ultimately get patients to remission. One last point is this holistic approach, and we're going to kind of talk about this in more detail about other medical conditions, other allergic conditions. I would challenge you to show me any other place where this holistic approach even exists. If you go to an allergist or you go to your general doctor and you have a medical issue that is not allied to food allergies, something else, well, they're going to send you somewhere else for that. They're not going to even bring in those specialists and the entire team. Here, we actually have an entire system that manages all components of disease. Now, certainly anything related to allergy, pulmonary, immune systems, we're going to own that as well. So we have our own specialists. We can even overlap a bit into the autoimmune world. But even if it's something completely unrelated, we're going to work hard to try and find you the right type of specialist, even if it's local to where you are, maybe in DC. And we're going to actually work with that specialist to try and solve that problem. Why? Because if we are doing our job right, the holistic approach to TIP means that we have to get the entire immune system on the right path and move it towards remission. So that's something we're committed to. This is something we've done now again for the better part of 2 decades. And that holistic approach, I think, gives individuals a lot of confidence in what we do, how we do it, and how we're able to move patients forward. And of course, the last thing that clearly differentiates us is a very, very high safety rate. To achieve this level of low reactivity tells you that our system is really built well. If you look at 100 patients who come into our program, roughly speaking, 85 of them will go start to finish. That means beginning to end, and never report a single symptom into our system. And that's an extremely high number. We'd love to get that even higher, of course. But of the remaining 14 of them would report a symptom only once the entire time that they're in the program. And, of course, we get them right back on track. And it's that 1%, that 1 out of 100 who may have more than one symptom or may have a bit of a more significant symptom. But what we tell folks is, look, we're here to manage this for you. So all you have to do is communicate into our system. We're going to deal with that immediately, and we're going to get you right back on track, typically within a matter of hours. So this is not something that goes on and on, for periods of time. I think it's also important to recognize that, when we're looking at this process of food freedom, I can talk about it from a medical and scientific standpoint. I could talk about it from a data science standpoint. But ultimately, as a parent, and I have 3 kids, I understand exactly what it means to have to raise kids and look at what their expectations are, right? And you're looking at kids who live with food allergies. The restriction, the anxiety, and the fear is real. And you can see it as young as 4 or 5 years of age. And I've been doing this for a long time. That's something I've noticed, even in very young kids. Ultimately, going through the process of TIP builds this confidence back. And you don't have to even be very far in TIP to start to see those benefits. Because what we are doing is taking a very complex diagnosis, which leads to a complicated lifestyle that sometimes is a bit unpredictable. And we're now taking control of that with you. And we're going to help you and hold your hand through this process so that now you have control once again. That's the one word I've heard from our families as they kind of start this process. They feel like they've regained some sense of control when things weren't like that before. Our patients early in the program, we're going to give you exact diagnoses. We're going to look at your whole immune system. We're going to look at other potential medical conditions. And we're going to start working on those early immune sensitivities so that the entire immune system starts to ratchet down. And that's something that, you'll see in patients who have eczema. We're kind of get their eczema under control very early. And we're doing this not necessarily with lots of new medications, but we're doing it, addressing it through the actual immune system. Within a matter of a month or two, you're going to start your actual first allergens, the foods that are actually, anaphylactic. And most parents are quite shocked that I can't believe I'm dosing this at home. I can't believe that I'm actually doing this entire process at home and I'm doing it through this gummy or through this tart. It's all dialed in, and that again builds confidence when things are actually moving really, really well. Ultimately, in the matter of the first year, you're going to clear a handful of allergens, which means that you can actually stop reading labels to a few foods. And while that may not sound like everything, it's a major step in the right direction. Once you can actually start to clear those foods, life becomes very, very different, right? Your again, level of anxiety, that threshold will actually change in a much more positive way. When we look at a few more months into the program, typically about 9 months into the program, whether it's asthma, patients who typically had difficulty with asthma, we generally have that under excellent control by that stage. And as you know now, hitting the winter season, that can be a real concern. But our parents are always amazed that, I came in and my child had really bad food anaphylaxis and they had really bad asthma, they had bad eczema, and now about a year into the program, all of a sudden the asthma and eczema are in markedly better control. And it's all because of the work of what TIP does internally and what it does upstream in that immune system. By about a year into the program, you definitely cleared one of your top allergens. And that is, again, I think just a big vote of confidence into the program. It allows patients to be able to move forward. And then, of course, the nice benefit is now we're actually shifting a lot of the work of the program, these different allergens, the maintenance foods, things like that. Those actually shift from daily to lower frequency, often weekly, and sometimes even every 2 weeks. So now all of a sudden the work of the program becomes not as significant, and that makes things, I think, get a whole lot better. So the program moves in a relatively, in a relatively good pace. Most parents are saying, it kind of moved faster than I thought it would move. And before you know it, you're going to actually have an ability to try new foods, right? So you're going to actually open up your diet. You can go to restaurants. This is happening before you reach the end of the program. This is something we actively encourage. So as you're clearing foods, you're going to new restaurants, you're able to try new products. You don't have to read labels anymore. And the last phase is really kind of clearing the final foods of the program. And again, these are large amounts of food allergens. If you're anaphylactic to dairy, at the end of the program, you are consuming 10 ounces of dairy in a single sitting. That's way more than what any normal person will do. And that shows you that the program is able to achieve the largest amount of clearance necessary to determine someone's in remission. If you're in peanuts, it's typically 60 to 75 peanuts in one sitting, again, very large amounts. If it's tree nuts, it's going to be about 3/4 of a cup of nuts, walnuts, pecans, cashews, pistachios. If it's fish, you're often doing around 4 to 6 ounces, depending on your age, of a fillet of a large amount of typically a whitefish, things of that nature. So in the end, this process of TIP, which can be as short as 1 year if you're just allergic to something straightforward like fish, it could be sometimes very long, like 5 years, if like in Xander's case here, where he's got a large number of foods we have to get through. But that process is actually built out in a way that provides control, provides safety, has many, many monumental wins as you kind of go through the program, and life just becomes a whole lot different. And I think that ultimately leads to this non-allergic life, ultimately what we like to call food freedom. It's also really important to remember that when we're doing this work, we are constantly looking at information and data. That means we are checking numbers, we are checking blood work, we are tracking how often you're dosing foods. We actually have a patient app now that's been live and running quite well. That also gives us additional data. If there's any sort of symptoms that are reported in, all of these things are going into our analytics models that allow us to continuously keep patients on track. What that results in is, as you can see here, is that patients are often starting our program with specific IgE levels that are very high, like 100. You guys have all seen those types of blood work done at local laboratories. But about a year into TIP, we see about a 40 to 70% drop, depending again on which foods we're specifically talking about. But you're seeing a significant drop in that specific IgE well before we're ever introducing that primary allergen, or it might be in the very earliest phases of introduction. But the point is, we do the hard work to draw down that allergic response using biosimilar protein approaches. And ultimately, once they hit remission, these numbers are down significantly. That provides safety. So this has to be achieved at the blood level, we call it the molecular level, and it also has to be achieved at the clinical level, which is why we do these very large doses of food to assure clearance. And once a patient hits remission, pretty much all of their foods have been moved to weekly or every 2 week or every 3 week type dosing cycles, which again can be managed very easily on an app, and life just looks a whole lot better. So when we think about this whole system, right, what are we talking about? So think about this allergic set of pathways. What can they do? What can they cause? How do they overlap? Well, it starts kind of at the top, meaning your head. So, your eyes, your nose, your sinuses, what we generally call hay fever, that's a big part of allergies. And roughly speaking, about 60% of people who have food allergies are going to have symptoms of the eyes, nose, and sinuses. That is going to be something we have to always look at if we're going to take a patient from anaphylaxis to remission. The other area that is often an issue is the upper airway. So we generally call that your throat, tonsils, things of that nature. Those can be enlarged in individuals who have allergies. And then of course your lower airway, where we generally see symptoms like asthma, bronchial infections, pneumonias even can happen, things of that nature. And we pay close attention to those things. We also look at the intestinal tract, right? So we're looking at the esophagus. If you've heard of the term EOE or eosinophilic esophagitis, that is something that we enroll about 5 to 6% of our patients come in with pre-existing eosinophilic esophagitis. We use very specific methods to get those patients under control, and then we get those patients to remission as well. So again, we're going to look at that whole system. Also in the GI tract, we have conditions that include colitis, so inflammatory bowel disease. And in addition to that, other conditions like FPIES, we as long as they're tied into anaphylaxis, we were also able to manage those types of complex cases. And then lastly is the skin. Obviously, the skin primary is going to be eczema, and eczema can be a real issue. It ends up being a condition where, as many of you know, eczema can often show up before food allergies actually develop. And then it can also become pretty severe in the first 3 to 5 years of life. And for about 10% of patients, they continue to have persistent eczema. That tends to be also pretty severe. 76% of our patients are going to come in with some form of a pre-existing condition as one of those that I mentioned. This is something that we will actively address. We're not going to allow this to be, untreated or unmanaged. Our team here will help manage. If you have a specialist that you're working with, we will work with that specialist as well. It's very important because ultimately the way TIP works, TIP will work best when we have normal anatomy. So think of your skin or your gut or your airway. We need the actual anatomy of the body to be in good shape. And we need inflammation to be well controlled. So we need, what I always tell my teams here is we do not like unchecked inflammation. Inflammation should be nicely controlled, and that ultimately allows the immune system to focus on these proteins, focus on these allergens, and ultimately turn down the immune response. So we do this again in total. We're going to address every major organ system that is not in control, and we will control it as we go through the early steps of TIP. And I will, as I always often mention, that roughly 2/3 of our patients in this program are severe. They are severe of some sort. They have severe eczema, they have severe asthma, they have severe food allergies. This is the group that we are very comfortable managing. Obviously, if you have a more modest case, not a problem, but this is something that we are very comfortable with. And in fact, it is the reason why so many patients travel here, because they've tried, they've gone to the local university, they've gone to the local specialist, they've tried biologic drugs, they've tried all these different things, and ultimately nothing seemed to help. And then they end up here, and now that journey is with us. As far as kind of asthma, specifically, I'll just talk about a couple high levels. Very important that when we're looking at asthma patients that we come in and check their lung function. Now, we're not just checking general lung function. We typically go pretty deep. We're pulling about 40 to 60 data parameters per patient with lung function. And we're looking at patients really not just as kind of airway patients. We're looking at inflammation of the airways, both upper and lower. We've done a great job, frankly, managing patients who are athletes. They're young, they're athletic, They have an airway that's kind of highly reactive, and by the time they're done with TIP, their airway is nice and calm. They're usually having supernormal lung function because they're good athletes, and they notice those kinds of changes. And again, we often are doing this with minimal to no medication. This is all modifying the immune system internally. Similarly, with eczema, we have to manage the entire skin, and that means looking at the skin across its layers, right? So from the outside of the skin to the middle part of the skin to the inner part of the skin, what are those factors that are triggering the immune system? Sometimes that could be things like bacteria, yeast, fungus, things that are living on the skin. That can be an issue. We'll address those. But many times it's things that are internal. So these internal factors are coming from the gut, or they're actually coming from the immune system and kind of arriving at the level of the skin. These are things that we can test for. These are things that we will often pay very close attention to. And often, if needed, we will refer into our own specialty system, have one of our specialists look at these types of cases. If you're on Dupixent or certain medications like that, and as many of you know, if you have eczema, there have been about 19 new drugs FDA approved for eczema. That's 19 in the last about 2.5 years, which is really quite remarkable. But my concerns are we're approving a lot of drugs that are pretty powerful drugs. These are medications. I mean, nobody likes steroids, but frankly, many of these medications are essentially the same as kind of consequential as what steroids can do. And we have to be very cautious. So while we are certainly open to utilizing medication to control severe cases, we will often try to do it with a minimum amount of medication. And when it comes to biologics, we have to work very closely with how those biologic drugs can actually impact the immune system and how TIP can actually move forward. When it comes to environmental allergies, I think we've done an amazing job here as well, where, about 20 years ago, I was really the first to use data modeling to actually deal with the environmental aspect. And I did it for one reason only, and that was about 30% of our patients had a direct tie in the environment to actual food as far as food allergies. And we knew we could find a biosimilar protein if we could actually give it to them as a treatment. So from there came the concept of SLIT. This is basically taking those environmental allergens, those protein sequences, building them up pharmaceutically into an actual product and spraying them under your tongue. Highly effective. In fact, after 10 years of prescribing this, I put myself on SLIT. Worked great. I'm glad I did it, and it took about 9 months to have relief. Still on it now a couple of years later, but I'm about to be done with it here in the next few months. So managing this is not as simple as saying, oh, just put a bunch of allergens in this spray and spray it. That is the old school method. It's no different than doing allergy shots, where you just kind of give people a bunch of shots to different allergens and hope it works. Here we do it with data science. We actually have published this work as well, but we will dial in what you're allergic to as far as pollens and environmentals, specific to your values as far as kind of severity, and we will build that process up in a nice, calm, sustained manner and ultimately drive those numbers down. So whether it's cat dander, dog dander, horse dander, to dust and general pollens, we're able to kind of target those things and draw those down. And I always get a kick out of families who will generally not get a family pet, because they know that their children are very allergic. And sometime during TIP, they're like, it'd be really nice to get a dog or get a cat in the house. And so those requests come in, and we'll often just pull their data. And if the numbers look good and things are heading in the right direction, we'll actually, give them some guidance on that, and ultimately they're able to enjoy that side of things if that's something that you desire. I always find that I'm a pet lover myself, so I've always really enjoyed that. So with that said, I'm going to hand off to our special guest, Melissa. Again, we're going to actually have to ask you to unmute and really hear about her story. And I think it's a phenomenal story of how she heard about TIP, what really kind of moved her to pursue this, and then of course hearing all about her son Xander. So thanks, Melissa.
With Xander, we were battling the eczema long before, well, it feels like long before we started contending with the food allergies. Xander's eczema started probably when he was about 2 months old. So this photo is probably right around that time. And if you look at his skin complexion around his chin, that's actually his skin complexion. The redness that you see everywhere else, all of that on his face is eczema. So surrounding his eyes, all over his cheeks, his entire forehead, all of that is eczema. I did probably every trick of the trade to try and provide him relief, oatmeal baths, breast milk baths. We had him all year round in long sleeves and the baby mitts, and he just could not get any relief from itching. Anything that you kind of hear from an extreme case of eczema where his skin was cracking and you could see, like water coming out of it, where we'd have to use that like antifungal medications to try and keep it dry. We were doing it all. I was bathing him in topical steroids. The doctor would say you could use it for X number of days and stop for a minimum of X number of days, and then you can restart it. That was our life for well over a couple years. We also, the allergists were telling us to try and limit foods to try and tone down a lot of his eczema, and it didn't really work. And so we struggled with that when he started solids. It got worse because for us, we didn't know that some of it was allergic reactions because we never got his skin stable enough to begin to see what looked like hives. So we started, avocado because it was a soft food. That one we saw as hives. But when we were doing like pureed pastas, he was vomiting with that. And so we were just like, oh, like, his system is reactive. We didn't know it was an allergic reaction at the time because it just felt like the world's worst game of whack-a-mole. Like we were just always felt like a step behind. And then at 13 months was when he had his first bout with anaphylaxis. I'll just give a trigger warning. If you're not in a position to hear about anaphylaxis, just tune out and come back in like 45-ish seconds. But for everybody else, he was 13 months old, not even walking yet. It was in the height of the pandemic. My husband and I order in takeout. We're experimenting with solids, and we get baba ganoush, which is essentially like hummus. And lo and behold, we didn't know he had a sesame allergy. So we put it on a pita. We're letting him gum on it. And in under 10 minutes, full blown hives head to toe. We could see him scratching, like feverishly scratching, like nothing we've ever seen. And I could see it just getting worse. And then I start to notice that his lips are starting to swell. And I was really lucky for two reasons. One, as I mentioned earlier, my older daughter also had food allergies. We never needed to use an EpiPen, but we always had one. And the other game changer for me is that my mom is actually most of her career, she was an ICU nurse. So I do what any panicked child do, and I call her, and she takes one look at him, and she is just like, EpiPen him now. And so I go to the diaper bag, I pull it out, I EpiPen him, we call 911. And that really just started the rest of our lives. That was the game changer for us, where we realized that food allergies was a part of our lives in a way that we never expected. He recovered. It was a lot slower for my husband and I. We were terrified and we really felt out of our depth. And so for us, everything kind of felt a little bit like this bubble boy scenario. Our allergist at the time did blood work, and we just started eliminating food after food after food, trying to see where we could try and calm down the eczema and also try not to have anaphylaxis. But it was impossible to see where the eczema ended and the food allergies began. Next slide. Yeah, I stand by the statement that food allergies has been written into the fabric of our family. With my older daughter, she had her first allergic reaction when she was 5 days old. So there's no part of my parenting or my parenting journey that didn't include food allergies. And so a lot of it was learning, and really being kind of foisted off the deep end, how to do all of the normal things we all have to do with our children, but also incorporate this factor into it. Next slide. And so, as I said, after that initial anaphylactic reaction, we lived our life in a constant state of stress. We really never got that eczema under control. It always felt like we were on the back foot with it. We never knew when it was kind of pivoting over into food allergies. You know, his skin in this picture, if you can see the color differentiation, those splotches all over his back. To this day, I'm not totally sure if that's hives or if that's all eczema patches, but that's always what his body looked like. And so even with the steroids, even with at one point an allergist put him on prescription grade antihistamines, this was about the best that we were ever able to get his skin to look. And this turned into his normal, where he was in this constant state of discomfort. And it showed up. It made the terrible twos and the three-nagers even that much more of a challenge, because morning, noon, and night he was just constantly uncomfortable. And so for us, you know, we were in this place of just hyper vigilance all the time. And even seeing how it was starting to mature my older daughter, as we were constantly dealing with these health challenges, seeing her just little by little, even at 4 and 5 years old, starting to hang up parts of her childhood to be a good sibling to him. Next slide. So so my husband and I travel for work, or I guess he travels for work and we go with him. In 2022, we moved to Thailand, and the climate in Thailand, it's very humid. There's a pretty substantial rainy season. And while we were there, his eczema started to get a little better, and kind of down to what really bad eczema is, I think, for a lot of people. We were still using the steroids all the time, but we were able to finally get off of the prescription grade antihistamines. And that was just kind of life, where we were just sort of battling with lotions and soothing baths and steroids and rinse and repeat. And this had been our life for about 3 years at that point. I was in a basically like a travelers group at Facebook to connect with Americans living abroad, and I saw a mom who was living in China, and she traveled for tip. And so she explained a little bit about the program, and it was like, you know, anyone who has food allergies, this just might be something worth looking into. And I'll be honest, I looked at it and I was just like, well, that seems too good to be true. And I just kept going. I saw it, and it was there, and I was just like, yeah, not for my kid. And so, but then once again, life really changed. And I'll give another trigger warning, tune out for another 30 to 45-ish seconds. When my daughter was 8 and my son was 3, they went to the same school, and they took the bus to school in Thailand. It was a little bit different here, where they could take the preschoolers on the school bus. The bus monitor, you know, gets Xander, puts him on the bus, and my daughter is making her way to the bus, but the bus driver leaves him on the bus to go look for other students. Another child has a snack, and if you know anything about the diet in Thailand, it's heavy nuts, heavy sesame, heavy tree nuts, just, you know, a big soup of everything that Xander's allergic to. And Xander had the self-control of a 3-year-old. So he grabs the snack from that other student, pops it in his mouth, and we are off to the races. Despite the fact that I had put every metric that I could have as a parent in place to ensure that he was in school, nobody could account for that. And so he begins, you know, another anaphylactic reaction. And my 8-year-old sees him on the bus and sees what's going on, and she calls me in a panic. And so she calls me on her smartwatch, and of course she's hysterical, because she at least had like, and kudos to her, she had the wherewithal to find the wrapper and read the wrapper in English, and was able to tell me that he was actually having the allergic reaction to wheat. And so I had to say to my child what no one ever wants to say to their child: you have my permission to do what it takes. I don't care what you have to do to get him to the nurse. I need you to get him to the nurse. And I can hear her manhandling him to the nurse. I am across town. I can't get there. And I've never felt more hopeless in my entire life. The nurse springs into action, his teacher springs into action, they get him to the hospital, and I meet them at the hospital. And, he was able to recover totally back to normal, recovers from the allergic reaction. But coming home from that with Xander and looking at my girls, and once again, watching my older daughter hang up another part of her childhood, as soon as I put them to bed that night, I sat down and I applied and I joined TIP. And I was like, I have to try something, because I never wanted to feel like that again. So I applied from Thailand. We were still really just nursing the trauma from that experience, but coming from Thailand was going to be a logistical challenge for us. And so I made the decision to look for a new position. And I flew back home in 2024 with Xander, and we started essentially commuting from Washington, D.C. to TIP in California to start his treatments. My husband was able to get a reassignment for his work, and then he followed a few months later with my girls. And we've been in DC for since June 2024, all of us together. Next slide. And so it felt like a leap of faith. I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. Like I said, I joined just with, I've got to try something. And so we've been in the program about a year and a half, and the milestones, they kind of snuck up on me at first. It started a little bit with like I said, he was bathing in steroids, where we start to get into summer. And of course, in summer, he gets a little bit more relief, or Xander gets a little bit more relief from his eczema. But then like in DC, it starts to get colder, it starts to get drier. And as we're going into winter, I'm starting to, it wasn't even immediate. It was like, we get into like November and December, and I'm noticing I haven't used steroids on him in like 3 or 4 months. And it was like, all right, well, let's just see what happens. And then we just kind of truck along, and then it gets into the height of winter where it's really cold and really dry. And we're noticing that intervention is we're little by little, we're reducing it. And that like the as needed was well into that winter, we didn't need it anymore. And so the eczema began to clear up. And I credit it with TIP, because my younger daughter actually has mild eczema also. And we do the same thing with her when it gets dry. Sometimes we got to do the hydrocortisone. And then all of a sudden, Xander, he doesn't need anything. And that's when I started to realize that I could absolutely credit TIP with that. We're long haulers. So for us, we're going to be going back and forth to Long Beach pretty regularly for about 4 to 5 years. But one of the big things that we've been able to celebrate, because when you're a part of the program, our milestones look different. You get excited about your child walking and talking and first day of school. The big celebration for us was Xander being able to eat his first full egg yolk. This is a kid who had full body hives just from the flu shot. And so going from that to this in only 18 months is huge for our family. We're still in the thick of it. It's a very regimented process. It requires a lot, and we're up to the challenge, but it's really thrilling to see some being able to hit some milestones to kind of give us that push to keep going, even on the days when it can feel really difficult. He's only 6, and so we have all the same fights that we have as any other family, in terms of, I don't feel like it, today's an off day, and we have to support him through that. But it's been so much, it feels so much easier to be supporting him through that than having to support the whole family through another chaotic, anaphylactic reaction, where every reaction just feels like it's around the corner for us. Next slide. This is the first year that I haven't needed to refill any of his steroids. It's the first year where I haven't finished a bottle of his steroids. And for us, this was a really big milestone. Seeing what he looked like as a baby in those pictures to what he looks like now as a first grader. It's really been a surprise, and it's been such a happy surprise for us to get this kind of affirmation just a year in. Next slide. Yeah, the emotional impact for Tip. With my older daughter, you know, she sees what it takes to go through Tip. You know, she'll be sitting on the couch, and if Xander's starting to zoom around a little bit too much during his dosing, she'll still mother head and she'll be like, "You're in your hour," and she'll make him sit down. But that's a very different dynamic than what was needed from her when we were in Thailand, where she had to step in and be the adult in the room to identify the crisis. For us, she knows that we have it handled. She knows what we're working towards. She knows the big picture. And I can see her really enjoy being a now 11-year-old and enjoying the full riches of being able to be a child. And that is a gift that has just been so, it meant the world to me, seeing her really be able to enjoy her childhood and even enjoying the full breadth of the spicy 11-year-old, you know, thing. She's being able to do that, and she's being able to enjoy her autonomy because we have control. We're starting to have control. Food allergies is not running our life the way it was a few years ago. Even though we have the vigilance, we have to be careful. The tone in our house is fundamentally different. The kids get to enjoy their extracurriculars, but we're noticing, you know, that they're being able to just really enjoy all of the things that kids get to enjoy. Xander, you know, his temperament, like I said, was very flavorful as a 2 and 3-year-old. But at 6, you know, he is a regular 6-year-old running around and enjoying life. And even when it comes to maintenance in the morning and we have to say, "No, buddy, you have to finish it," the interaction with him is completely different, because I think he's starting to see also his body just starting to feel better. And it's showing up a lot in his personality as well. You know, the program, it is absolutely a commitment. And we moved across the world to be able to meet the challenges of the commitment. And I'm starting to see my family thrive. And so I'm really excited to see what the next few years is gonna bring. But I'll hand it back to Dr. Randhawa. Thanks so much for allowing me the opportunity to share my story.
You know, Melissa, that first of all, that was awesome. Thank you very much. I mean, that it's an eye-opening story. I credit to you and your husband for, you know, I mean, it's the priority. You realize that it's, you know, in so many ways, you know, it's not easy to have other options, right? Because you try to control this, you try to control that. I'm going to ask you a question in a second, but hearing about your daughter reminds me of it's probably like 12 years ago. I had this boy who's probably about 5, 6 years old. He had an older sister who would always show up to the appointment. She was not allergic. She was a Taekwondo, you know, accelerated belt, very, very good. And I still remember the day I gave him his first peanut, right? And she was so protective of him that, you know, she literally kicked the peanut out of my hand because she was like, "This doesn't make sense." It hurt my hand a little bit. That girl is now, I got an email a couple weeks ago, is now in medical school, which is awesome because she wants to go into this space, into allergy, which I think is phenomenal. I go back 20 years, and 20 years ago, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I'd say something like 8 out of 10 of my initial patients, 8 out of 10 were homeschooled kids. And, you know, for those of you who don't know much about homeschooling, like, that's not something that most people elect to do in the food allergy space. It's something that becomes a result of something, right? So these are families who try to manage life with food allergies and food anaphylaxis. they did everything they could. They organized things, they read labels properly, they changed, you know, kind of the kitchen, they changed the diet. Everybody else in the family lived this life. And then they go to school and, you know, something happens, right? Just like with Xander's case, something will happen. Then they don't trust the school environment anymore. They'll try a 504 plan, they'll try and change this, and then something else will happen and they pull them out of school. They would try to manage them in a homeschool environment, and then something would even happen at home. Like often it was a grandparent who came over to kind of manage things and they made a mistake and now a reaction occurs. And I think ultimately, I guess my question for you is, I mean, this was what I saw so much starting, where it took kind of a series of unfortunate events to convince a family to say, you know what, it's time to do something about this. What is it from your perspective, looking backwards now, right, that kind of creates that type of, you know, approach? Is it just control? Is it you know, the medical side, or I mean, are the medical, you know, folks kind of saying, oh yeah, you can totally manage this, go for it? Well, what's your perspective now looking backwards?
I think it's chronic stress. I think when you're handling so many factors and so many different components, and there's so many things that are outside of your control, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens just one after the other after the other, and it's a series of smaller decisions, and then all of a sudden you see that you've shrank your world, and then it winds up being that your entire world is within the confines of your house. Even, you know, even for me, it takes a lot of vigilance and a lot of stubbornness to try and ensure that Xander has a life that's the same as every other child. Every birthday party, every family gathering, every time we walk out the door, there's so many unknowns, and continuing to be resolute of, he deserves to be able um to have a full life. And for me, I think a lot of it of why, even going to Thailand, we went to Thailand, we knew the food allergies were with us when we went to Thailand. For us, it was like, we have to figure it out. He has to be able to live in the world. But I think that for me, I grappled with all of those decisions, because it gets easier to just, you can control all of the factors in your house. And sometimes as a parent, that's the only time you can breathe and you can relax a little bit, because you have bubble wrapped and baby proofed, you know, even your kitchen, and you're baby proofing essentially your kitchen for safe foods. And as a parent, sometimes that's the only time you can relax. And so living in that hyper vigilant state, it gets to be too much. It can absolutely get to be too much. And so I think a little bit, one decision at a time, you're deciding, there's only so much I can control here to be able to show up and do my best. And little by little, what we just can control gets smaller and smaller. You know, my older daughter, when we were in the pandemic, because Xander was 2 and my youngest was a newborn at the time, we homeschooled. And so my husband was learning Thai to go to Thailand, and we were in this teeny tiny little apartment, all 5 of us, and I'm trying to figure out how to homeschool a 2nd grader. And so when the food allergies started coming along, I had a lot of permission to just never leave my house. And then when we got to Thailand, I had to kind of force myself to have a little bit of that palate cleanser, where it was, we have to find a way to live here. And with a sesame allergy, a peanut allergy, a tree nut allergy, that is no small feat. We found it took vigilance. In the 2 years that we lived there, I found one Mexican restaurant that I could order from that had corn tortillas. That was it. Everything else we were cooking at home. We had to account for every single ingredient. It took a toll. It took a toll. I was working from home at the time, but I could feel myself being drained all the time. I mean, just constantly tired. So I can understand how that decision for homeschooling gets made. It's not crazy to me at all.
Wow. I think that's the word, hypervigilance. You know, hypervigilance means high cortisol, it's high stress. And that's not only for parents, it's for the kids. And it just goes on and on. Again, I can only say this, I can assure you Xander's going to get the same success as everybody else. Things are going to change, and you're going to see in a matter of probably less than you think, because every time we check new data, we're able to often, reduce the duration of tip. It's just a whole different world. I mean, all that hypervigilance, that high stress just drops down. First for the kids, first for the patients, then for the family and their extended community. It's really a remarkable thing. So you're on your way. And really, that's the takeaway. That's the word, hypervigilance, and it doesn't have to be that way. So big kudos to you. We're going to move on to our questions here in a second. I'd like to just share one last video.
I'm Evan. I've been in the program for 3 years, and today was my graduation. I've been in this program for 3 years. It's almost like a part of me now, and it's kind of like a surreal feeling because now I can eat whatever I want, whenever I want. It's really exciting.
I'm super excited as a parent to be able to say yes to him going out to more activities with his friends and not having to pack everything for an entire day. He gets to go trick-or-treating for the first time and can collect all the candy, and I don't have to worry about any accidental reactions, accidental exposures, and I'm so excited to give him opportunities that he's missed out on when he was younger.
I mean, it just changes everything because recently, before I graduated, my friends last minute invited me to go to a theme park in another state, and I was able to say yes when I wouldn't have been able to before, and I would have had to miss out on something. But now it's huge. There's so much less that I have to miss out on, and there's so much more yeses than there is no's.
And that's how we celebrate our food freedom for our patients. So we're going to answer a few of the pre-submitted questions. We'll open up to the audience here for any questions you may have. Again, I'll try and bring in Melissa on some of these questions as well. First question is, does tip help with skin healing if eczema isn't caused by food allergies? That's an interesting question. I'd say that if you look at our data and external studies, about 90 to 95% of eczema, if you have food allergies and you have eczema, they are going to be intertwined. We certainly have cases where that is not the situation, and we will manage those cases. In fact, we have published some recent case studies on some of those types of cases. So answer is yes, we'll do the best we can. I've yet to find a case of eczema that we can't manage. I will say there are some cases where there's a lot of scratching and itching where it becomes a nerve-based issue that can be challenging, but even there we've had tremendous success. Second question is, what happens if symptoms flare while working through tip milestones? That can happen. It's, again, not terribly common, but should it happen, we're going to be paying very close attention. So every time you come in, every 8 to 10 weeks or so, we'll be doing a full exam, monitoring the skin, comparing it to previous times, previous visits, and so forth. But ultimately, it is really something we look for the parents to communicate with us or the patient directly. Put it in through Tip Connect, where we're on 24/7, 365. Let us know what's going on, send pictures, and we will try to monitor those changes and make adjustments accordingly. We rarely have to make significant adjustments due to eczema, but again, should it happen, we've had very good success in getting those patients to the finish line. Third question is, once we reach food freedom, does the eczema and asthma benefits last long term? Answer is absolutely yes. We have published the work so far only on hay fever sinus disease that was published last year and then presented at one of the conferences. Eczema wise, we're working on some studies on that. It's a little difficult because eczema there's all types of eczema and there's a lot of different variants of eczema, but that's something that we will certainly put out here the next year as far as literature. As far as asthma, we have plenty of lung function data showing the long-term benefits. So the short answer is yes. I mean, again, we look at long-term remission, and the long-term remission has to occur. And I think, in Xander's case, I think the pictures that you saw most recently, I mean, you can see a day and night difference in his skin. And I think that's just an example of what we see, not only short-term, but long-term. Remember, Our job here is to make sure your immune system, the immune system of the tip patient, is not aggravated. We are trying to keep this system calm. We're trying to keep it down turned or down regulated. And that is not a short-term solution. That is truly a long-term solution for both the food, food anaphylaxis side, as well as other medical conditions. Number 4, this will be directed to Melissa. So what made you decide to start TIP versus other treatments? I mean, did you look at other treatments? Was that an option? What was your experience with that?
Well, I mean, the situation with my daughter in Thailand having to step in was what ultimately had us join TIP. But for us, it was pretty straightforward. No other allergist would touch him. I would go in every year and I would get all of the blood work done, and they would just send me out the door and say, well, let's see if next year looks a little bit better. His total IgE, I think on one of his labs was like around probably just under 4,000. He has extremely high IgE. So they wouldn't go near him. And it was really disheartening, I gotta be honest, because I don't have a medical degree. I have people in my family who have medical degrees, but I sure don't. I'm just a mom. I was a very determined mom, but I was just a mom. And so it was really demoralizing every time I would get that blood work back, and everyone and physicians, people who have studied, people who are supposed to know a lot more than me, are essentially saying, see what you can do. and that was it. And I had no other options. And so we were really on our own to try and just make the best out of that we could out of our life. But for us, it was tip or bust. OIT was never put on the table for us. There was nothing else.
Yeah, no, that's well said. I mean, certainly for typical OIT, there's a lot of disqualifiers, right? I mean, number one, if you have very high IG levels, you're disqualified. If you have bad eczema, you're disqualified. If you have asthma, you're disqualified. There's so many exclusions that it makes it difficult, right, to move forward. And but ultimately, like I said, those are these are our patients. This is what we deal with every single day. Thank you for that. Number 5 is, what advice would you give to parents managing severe eczema right now? I mean, that's a great question, given you've seen it full circle.
My first bit of advice: be very kind to yourself. You are doing the absolute best that you can with all of the medical options available to you. Eczema is really hard to manage, especially if they have a severe case. And for us, we saw a lot of the relief through doing TIP. I did notice that it was starting to go in the right direction as he was getting older, where we were able to get off of the prescription antihistamine, but still very reasonable, very regularly kind of trying to keep his patches under control. But I think, be kind to yourself. It's a lot. It's incredibly stressful. And it's really hard when you see your child being uncomfortable and you feel really powerless to be able to relieve it. So, just know that you're doing the absolute best that you can. And there's a community here where your story isn't unique. My story is not unique. There's a lot of kids where OIT was not an option. And that actually was one of the big things that was really comforting to me in the program. It was the first time we felt ordinary, funny enough, where it was a lot of kids coming in who had the same challenges that we did, and being able to connect with parents who walked my walk. It was empowering for me to know that this was possible. I wanted to circle around really quick to question number 2, just from the parent perspective of what happens if symptoms flare while working through the milestones. So for TIP, if you have a reaction, they have a TIP reaction hotline. Xander actually had a pretty severe allergic reaction about this time last year. It wasn't related to maintenance. It wasn't related to dosing. We were at my brother's house. All of the kids were together, and I think, they were watching a movie. The lights were off, and that slice of pizza got switched between plates. That's what I think happened. But we were enjoying time with our family, making memories, and then all of a sudden, here comes anaphylaxis like the world's worst boyfriend that just will never ever stay away, and like it's just kind of like wrecking our holidays. So we have to EpiPen him, and we call tip and we report the reaction. By the time Xander was loaded up in the ambulance, we were on the phone with and the on-call doctor as we are going on our en route to the hospital. This is a Sunday night. This is like 10 p.m. Like it's the middle of the night, you know, but we had no trouble getting through. They called us again because anyone who's had anaphylaxis knows you're going to be sitting in that ER for about 4 to 5 to 6 hours to make sure you don't have a secondary reaction. They called us again to see how Xander was doing. They called us again right before discharge. All of the discharge instructions for us going forward was sitting in our email while we were home. You know, anaphylaxis, it doesn't get any easier no matter how many times you go through it with your child. So I know even as the doctor was talking to me, and the doctor knew, I was probably absorbing about 10% of what they were saying because I was so stressed and panicked about whether Xander was going to be okay. But they made sure it was in writing. They knew it was sitting in my inbox when I got home in the middle of the night. They called us again the next morning, not only to see how Xander was doing, but to see how we were doing, because they understood how traumatizing it was for us. And then fast forward a month or two later, we're getting ready to go back for our next appointment long after he's recovered. They reach out to us again to see if there's any other changes, if there was anything else that had been going on, and also to see how our family was doing. And so in one round of anaphylaxis, they were available and they followed up proactively. All of that information was them reaching out to us. You know, when you have a child with anaphylaxis, it could just feel like a day in the life. So I wasn't making a point to reach out and offer this information. They were asking us, and they actually were asking us if we were okay. But yeah, so that's just in a very practical reality of what it can look like if you have a reaction in the program. That's what our experience was last year.